Hey everybody, so in lieu of getting out some detailed text documents, I want to just get this quick movie out here so people can get a little more of a feel for what Modular FileMaker is and what the guideline is that we are supporting. So this is just a file called module spec, and it's really an empty file. Just has the the organizational pattern that we think is a good idea. So in this file we have a folder called app, and that has to do with the anything that you would normally put in your file that has to do with the application logic. And we actually think you can organize that by modules as well. But what we're going to focus on are modules that provide features like session, error logging, master detail, etc. And those would be in a folder called modules. And in that folder, go to the top level folder called modules. In that folder, you have a folder for each module with its name as the name of the folder. Inside there, it's really important that you have a Readme as the first sort of obvious thing to click on and select and open. And that Readme should describe the module name, the maintainer, maybe a link to the website where people can get updates. And it should talk about, it should describe briefly the installation steps or have links to installation documentation on the web. It should also lay out the dependencies as best that it can. That's that. You should also, if your module requires configuration, so in other words, some kind of a script where things get set on startup or what have you, you're going to want to put that in its own spot out here so that it's obvious that you need to have a configuration script. And that configuration script will need to get filled out by the consumer or finished by the consumer of the module. It's also really nice if you can do a script which tests the installation and tests the configuration to make sure that it's done right. A big part of Modular FileMaker is testing to make sure that we catch the common ways in which a developer might get mixed up or just might get lost when installing a module. So we want to make it really easy to test and determine that the module is installed correctly. We then have two other folders, public and private. Public should contain the public API to the module, both inbound and outbound, and private should be the under the hood scripts that are not meant to be called from outside of the module. So now as a consumer of the module, I know that this is where I go to interact with the module. I go to public, and inside of public we have a couple of folders, 3 in this case. If it's a UI module, then you might want to put a folder for buttons in here. I think that makes a lot of sense to explicitly call out where the scripts are that are being attached to buttons on layouts. But here we have just some simple ideas for how to lay out an API. We have API, so this is inbound hooks coming into the module and maybe returning results back out, whatever. Triggers turn out to be really important because triggers are a place in which our modules can collide. So we want to make sure that we expose the triggers really well and dictate which ones we're using and exactly how they're going to be used. So they should all go in a folder called triggers. Outbound hooks is kind of a new one we're trying out here, and that is for when your script needs to call out to other modules or to the core application itself, but you don't want to have to maintain that logic inside your module. Then you put a stub or a hook out here. So the most common use case is probably like error handling. So if your module is going to handle errors, or it's going to provide for error handling, maybe it just has a script in here called handle errors, and that script is to be linked to a error handling module, for example. So that's it. That's pretty much the basics of it. You know, we as far as the organization goes, we think even if your UI or if your module only contains, say, custom functions and, say, layouts, for example, or tables, we still think you should put a folder in the file in the modules folder so that a person looking for what modules are installed in this file always knows that they can go here and they can see every module that's installed in the system. A couple of things to make note. We talked about script triggers, and we do have some script trigger custom functions in here that it's good to use when you're enabling and disabling script triggers. The reason is because those really have to, again, play well together. Last thing I just want to touch on briefly is, well, let me point those out. So those are manage custom functions. So here they are. Triggers are active, triggers disable, enable, and triggers reset. Now, I actually think you can build modules that are compatible with these custom functions without using them, and I'll give some examples in the future of how to do that. But for right now, I'm pretty much just using these custom functions to handle my trigger disabling and enabling setup. The other thing I want to talk about briefly is how to pass parameters. Again, we don't want to impose somebody else's our own methods of packaging up parameters onto our people who use our modules if we can help it. So if you have a module that's pretty simple and you have a script that only takes a single parameter, then I suggest you just pass it. Don't get fancy with packaging them up in let notation or what have you. Just pass it. It's light, it's easy, it's simple, everybody understands it. If you want to pass parameters, you don't want to use let notation or anything fancy, and you need to pass more than one, then just use a list function and pass them by position. And they can get parsed out with get value. If you're going to pass multiple parameters by name, then the spec calls for using let notation. And let notation has been described elsewhere, and we'll have some links to what that is. But basically, it's a way of package. It's actually covered in the documentation in FileMaker's help docs. So yeah, it's actually pointed out in the FileMaker help docs how to do let notation. So I'm not going to cover it here. We'll cover it at a different time. But you can look it up in the FileMaker Pro help under the let function example. And even when we're passing by, even when we're using let notation, one note, we use a $ in front. That indicates to the consumer of this module, the person using this, that, oh, we're expecting let notation. This function that I've included here can parse parameters, and it's really based on one of the custom functions done by, I think it's Jeremy, did these. And there's some links in here about where they come from and how to use them. But I've broken them out so that we don't actually need to use a custom function to pass to accept the multiple parameters and parse it out. And so that's the handle right here. So the main point, again, one of our primary principles is not to use things we don't have to use just because it's the way we may like that particular style. We don't want to force somebody to use a custom function unless there's no other way, or it's just maybe part of the point of the module is all about custom functions. But in this case here, we're just passing the multiple parameters. There's no real reason to force the user to use a custom function to package those or parse them. So don't ask them to. So that's really it. I'm going to do another video in a little bit about looking at an actual module and how it's laid out. Thanks.